recording. Yes. So I should have started by sharing the screen. So can you all see my screen now?
Yes, madam.
Yes, madam.
Okay. So let us start on research philosophy. So what we are covering, what we covered last week on types of research, then what we're going to cover, research philosophy, philosophies and research studies. Those are basically the components of research, the basic components of research, the tools that you will use in research. Now, most important thing to understand about research, it is something that is conceptual in nature. It's a skill, but it's a skill different from all other skills that you pick up. It's about your thinking. Basically, researchers are thinkers. That's what we are, thinkers. That's what you and I are, thinkers. And this is what we are trying to do. What I'm trying to do is to guide you on how to think, which directions are possible for you to think in. So last week we looked at research types, and we looked at the two generic types of research. And these were, there was, sorry, my mind is a bit blank. There was basic research, and then there was empirical research, yeah, where we saw one research type which was purely about adding knowledge, and the other was about handling realistic problems that are there in research. And then underneath that, there were several types of research. We saw descriptive, analytical, the different types, but those are just the generic. Now, when we also look at the research philosophies, they also cover certain types, but basically they also fall in the same category. You see where you will kind of get an idea where each type of research falls or comes into. So a basic outline of what we are going to look at today. Yeah, that the research types, the two major research types we are actually going to look at are these two, positivist and interpretivist. This one, not so much. We really won't look at it. The realist, we won't look at that much, but the two, positivist and interpretivist. And you will begin to see where each of these philosophies lie, especially when we saw the types quantitative and qualitative. These two research philosophies then lead to two research approaches, deductive and inductive. And again, you will see the relationship between quantitative and qualitative. Then we are going to look at the main research strategies. This will come in the second lecture. I don't know if we shall have time today, but we shall see. Then we shall explain the concepts of validity and reliability. Then the ethical issues. Now, validity and ethical issues, most likely we shall discuss them in the lecture on research methods. But I'll try to split them because it can be quite a bit of a mouthful. Now, on the whole, the research approach is the research process is engulfed in something we refer to as an onion. This is just to say that there are different layers to research. So each of these layers, as we go further into the inner circle, this is when we become practical. Actually, from the second layer of research strategies, this is when we actually become practical, we begin to do. But all this outer layer is mostly thinking, where you see your problem and you say, how do I begin to approach it? So the problem is what we refer to as the phenomena. Last week we talked about this term, the phenomena. We discussed it in detail. We found out what it is. This is the problem, the thing that you have observed, that you believe needs to be studied, and you give the research community an answer. Okay, that is what we have, that is the problem we have seen. Then we come to the philosophy, the research philosophy. How do I intend to look at this research? How do I intend to look at it? Each one of the people talk about personal philosophies, the philosophies by which they live by. There are people who talk about it. I don't know if you are one of them. Personally, I don't think I have a personal philosophy. Maybe I have personal beliefs, but definitely I think we could say that a philosophy could be a belief, something, the way you approach things in life. There are people who say, if it feels good, I do it. There are others who will say, if it is good for the majority, that's what we go for. Then there are others who say, no, it's the individual that matters. What is the implication for the individual and so on. So that those are different philosophies people live by. Now, in research, there are two main philosophies that guide a researcher. The first is positivism, and the second is the interpretivism. Okay, we saw that in the previous slide. These two, positivist and the interpretivist. There's also realist, but we're not going to really look at that. So we're going to see what each of these are, but after you say, okay, this is the philosophical viewpoint I'm going to take with my research. You don't have to state it explicitly in your writing, but it is something that guides you. You then come to your research approach. The research philosophy guides your approach, which is either deductive or inductive in nature. That is your research going to be quantitative or qualitative in nature? Once you've made that decision, you then decide on the methodologies. These are the methods, different methods, and there are several of them. I'll take you through them. And those which are specific to IT. Yeah, there are methods which are specific to IT, especially if you're building an artifact. An artifact could be a system, a network system, a software system, whatever it is. Then we come to the time horizon, if your research is going to be cross-sectional or longitudinal. Again, we shall discuss that in detail. Then we have what we refer to as our data collection methods. Now, many times students mistake data collection methods for research methods or strategies. These are data collection methods or tools, yeah? Your methods are these. Is it an experiment? Is it survey? Is it case study? When we look at specifically methods which are known to IT, we have design science, we have action design science, ethnography, all those. Those are the research methods. These, what you see, sampling, secondary data, interviews, questionnaires, those are research tools. But we're going to discuss all these one by one. Let's start with the philosophies. We start with positivism. Yeah, and as I'm talking, like as previously I've done, what I've done is to ask one of you to go and search online. The reason for doing that is to get you to participate as much as possible in the lecture. I don't want this to be a one-way street where Sheba is talking and nobody else is saying anything. My knowledge, imagine my knowledge is very limited because I'm human, yeah? So even when you bring yours, we expand our knowledge to something bigger. So don't be shy. Even if you're shy, you can send a message in the chat room. There is no wrong answer. Okay. So let us look at the first approach, which is positivism. Yeah. So this is the general thinking that we normally find. So here, this type of research, we have what we call quantifiable observations because it has to be as objective as possible. Okay, it has to be as objective as possible. So take an example. If somebody went to main campus in Nkozi and did a head count of number of students, and then split them up into groups, the gender, then splits them up into tribes and nationalities. Then the person would say, the majority of the students of Uganda Matters University Nkozi campus belong to tribe X. We therefore can say tribe X is more attracted to Uganda Matters University than all other tribes and other nationalities. That is a quantifiable observation. This person has been as objective as possible by focusing on numbers. Yeah. So this method is usually what we call, when we look at the word quantifiable observations, we know that is pointing already to quantitative style of research. Yeah. One of the things positivists usually try to say is that they are objective in their analysis. And sometimes there are political arguments between the quantitative researchers and qualitative researchers. Because for them, they're saying that they're dealing with numbers. If this number of people are the majority, then that means that this is the answer to it. Whereas the qualitative researchers will say, or what we'd refer to as the interpretivism style of research. They say, no, that is a wrong way to observe. Now take an example. I gave you the example of a researcher coming to Uganda Matters University in Nkozi and doing a head count, and then separates number of students according to tribe, and then makes a conclusion. Majority of parents from this tribe are more attracted to Umu than other tribes. Well, that may not be necessarily true. A qualitative researcher, if they decided to go in depth and decided to talk to parents, specifically parents of that side, why they brought their students there, you may find they didn't know there were other universities. Because this is the closest one they see, they assume, oh, this is the university that we've decided on. Or maybe the people who hail from that area were more active in advertising or marketing Umu. So it's not necessarily the tribe. It may be about the marketing strategy. It could be anything. Yeah, it could also be an income issue, where maybe people from this particular region are they are more economically mature than other areas. So it could be anything. It isn't just a matter of looking at the statistical analysis. So sometimes also the positivist attitude misses out certain things, because what you're doing is you're generalizing. Yeah, you're generalizing in what you're seeing. Now the interpretivism, this is more the qualitative kinds of research, where these people say that each particular situation, circumstance, or individual is unique, and we cannot generalize some things. Now, we realize some things can be generalized and some things cannot be generalized, okay? So maybe it's usually quite common if you went to, let's say, a secondary school and you looked at performance of students in the subject of mathematics, especially mixed schools, and you compare them, the mixed schools, you compare the girls' performance against the boys' performance. Normally, you find boys are much stronger at mathematics than girls. Now, the positivist viewpoint may end up saying, oh, this may mean that boys are more intellectually attuned to mathematics than girls. The interpretivist or the qualitative researcher would say, no, let me go and find out. What is the unique situation for each one of these girls? And this researcher may find out, oh, these girls have low self-esteem because maybe at home, most girls are shown that they are less important than boys. Maybe that they are given more chores in the household than the boys, so they spend less time on books than the boys. And all these other kinds of things that come in for women, the things that disturb women. For example, we have more sexual abuse for girls than boys, things like that. So the interpretivist point of view is where the person says, the researcher says, I'm going to try to understand the details in the situation. Okay, I need to understand the details in the situation. Last week, I gave you the example of female genital mutilation, where researchers said for us to try and find out why is it women keep going back to carry out this horrible act against themselves and even against their children, their daughters, their sisters, and so on and so forth. Why? And those researchers usually go and spend time with the community. They will spend months, sometimes even a year, with somebody, and with the intention of trying to understand the situation, trying to understand why things are the way they are. Now, normally they will say this is not, you can't, sometimes the positivist viewpoint says, with this kind of research, you can't be objective because you get emotionally involved. Well, yes and no, that is very true. Myself, I took this interpretivist point of view when I was doing my research. And there was a time when my biases, I could feel them coming in. I'll give you an example. For me, I was doing research in a community there near Nkozi in India. If some people may know where India is, it's on your way to Masaka. So I spent a lot of time with that community. I went for most of their healthcare activities when they had workshops and things like that. And there were some biases, of course, I had when I was going into the research. Take an example, that particular project, it was when I went to do the research, there was a project happening with Notre Dame University in the US. So of course, our poor people in Uganda, the minute they see a white person, then they start demanding that you'd find the village health team members would start demanding, oh, give us bicycles so that we can ride at night and visit our patients, things like that. And I remember there was a lady who was with me, and she immediately when she had it, she said, you see this, the minute they see a white person, they start demanding. And of course, also me, I had those biases. But with time also, I had to question myself. I had to counsel myself. And I said, no, Sheba, you're doing research. Forget your biases. Simply report what you have seen. If you can see the village health team member is in a situation of poverty, that is going to affect their performance. It's going to affect their performance as a village health team. It's also going to affect their ownership of a mobile phone, which you're going to need for your research. And so I got that and I used it objectively. As much as I'd spent time with them, I had to get rid of my biases. Now, key point for all of you in research, if you know that you're emotionally attached to something, don't do it in research. If you know you're emotionally attached to something. Case in point, I'll give you an example of a lady. I attended a PhD defense. It was more proposal defense. And there was a lady who was researching on the issue of land conflict between Buganda and Bunyoro. Now, some of you who may know the history of that, I think there was some land which was taken from Bunyoro and given to Buganda during the colonial times. So that has caused some friction here and there. So as the lady was presenting her work, you could see she was visibly emotionally affected. You could see the anger. So I remember one of the professors telling her that I think you had better change the topic because it's quite clear you're emotionally attached to the issue. I don't know whether she was on the side of Buganda or Bunyoro, I don't know. I didn't get her name. But you could see she was emotionally affected, meaning she could not report back effectively on that matter. She couldn't report back objectively. So the interpretivism style of research, most of the time, it is about interpreting, making different interpretations of a situation. Yeah. So you create kind of, you bring the totality of the picture, the wholesomeness of the picture into the situation, as opposed to the positivist approach where you're dealing with statistical analysis. When you're bringing in numbers, there are many things you miss out at the bottom. Yeah. Feelings that may arise about something was in a situation. So here you're trying to bring a whole picture so that we understand, we have a holistic understanding of why people do what they do. What is the intention of someone? Now, let me also bring this even to the area of IT, okay? ICT people, we produce, we develop systems, not so?
Yes, madam.
Yeah, we develop systems and we implement them in different situations, okay? I'll give you a case in point. For me, something I observed while I was head ICT UMO. When Zinod was implemented, Zivasti, what most of you know as Zivasti, when it was implemented. Initially, I was being head ICT, I was supposed to help in implementing it, and myself and my team, we did our part. But then we could sense there was antagonism, first of all, from the academic staff. The academic staff were were not happy. And then also me, with time, when I got challenges as the ICT department, when we got challenges and we reported about it, there was also opposition. And I remember also me, I got mad, and I said, to hell with this system. I remember also implementing it at going to train some students at master's level, and they completely rejected the system. So one might say, oh, is the system not usable? Is it not user friendly? Someone may make the positivist attitude, maybe it's not user friendly. But if you went deeper and try to understand, now, for example, if someone came to me as head ICT and asked me, why did you reject it? I rejected it. For me, I rejected it because of the creators. In my personal judgment, I felt they were unprofessional with the way they dealt with the constructive criticism about their system. So for me, it wasn't about the system, it was about the creators of the system. Yeah. Then you find another person will say, for me, I didn't get a clear explanation from management. Why am I using this system? So if someone took time and did research to try and understand the situation, you may find different aspects come out. So also with those of us in ICT, that's one of the most important things that we must try to understand. Our work, what we do, if you're implementing something, you must try and have a holistic understanding of the situation in which you're placing your system. So that's where qualitative research or the interpretivism philosophy may come in. The third philosophy is realism. So this one is based on the reality that exists, independent of thoughts and beliefs. So, so this particular perspective tries to borrow some perspectives from the positivist attitude and try to combine them with the interpretivism attitude. So this is where sometimes a researcher may say, I'm going to adopt a mixed method approach. I'm going to have a quantitative approach and a qualitative, because the two will beef each other, will try to support one another. So you try to put it in terms of numbers, and let's say you sit down and say, I'm going to have first of all, I'm going to have one qualitative approach. I'm going to go with interviews and talk to people. And then when you talk to several people, the person might even put their qualitative research in terms of statistics. that I interviewed 10 people, and out of the 10, 7 were saying this is true, this is false. Yeah. So 7 of them had the same belief. And because they had the same belief, we can then conclude that this is true or false. So this person is trying to combine these two approaches, the two approaches. So before I go any further, do we have any question, or is there anything that doesn't make sense?
Good morning, madam.
Good morning. Yes, Faith.
Okay, everything is clear to me this morning, but I just want to take it back to the word philosophy.
Yes.
Because it's not my first time hearing it, philosophy, right? But I really want to get a clear understanding on what exactly philosophy means.
Philosophy is. Okay. Thank you, Faith, for that question. Now I'm just going to ask Godwill. Komi, Godwill, can you just type in Google the word philosophy? What does the word philosophy mean? I'm also going to do the same here. Okay, and we also, so that we can try to have a clear understanding what philosophy is.
It's okay.
Yes, please.
Yes, hello. I've got some definition here.
Yes.
That philosophy is the study of fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline.
Okay, so that is one definition. Is there a second one? Do you see a second one? Okay, so thank you, Godwill. There are two definitions here. Let me first deal with the first one, which Godwill has given us, the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge. Studying the nature of the fundamental basis of knowledge. So we have the study of philosophy, then we have philosophy as a theory or an attitude. Those are two different definitions. When we think about it as a subject of study, we are saying that somebody is trying to study the nature of knowledge, of reality, of existence. Yeah. So in history, we have philosophers. Some of the earliest philosophers that we know about are from Greece. Yeah. They say Greek is introduced to the world, the knowledge, because they had their philosophers like Socrates, Aristotle. So one of them, I think it was Socrates, who asked a question. This is how a philosopher someone who studies philosophy, he asked a simple question: how do I know that I exist? Let me ask Jasper or Dong. How do you know that you exist? How do you know that you're really here on this earth? Maybe we're all hallucinating. How do we know? How do I even know that I'm here as a human being? If someone asked you that question, what would you say? Don't worry, there is no right or wrong answer. We're just discussing. This is philosophy. Philosophy is just a discussion. Just for you there, Odong? Shall we assume Jasper is not there? Okay, let me ask Mary, KG Mary. If someone asked you, how do you know you exist? What would you answer, Mary?
Hello.
Yes, please.
Morning,
Mary,
madam.
how would you, don't worry, there's no right or wrong answer.
Madam, Odong is back. Let him go. Jasper.
Yes, please.
Yes, Odong. I asked a question.
Yes.
Yeah, my question was, we are discussing, we're trying to understand what philosophy is. And here we found a definition online which says that the first definition, it says, when it's looking at it on the academic sense as an academic discipline, that philosophy is the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality and existence. Yeah, the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality and existence. So Dong, I asked a question, something that was asked by, I believe, Socrates. How do I know that I exist? So I'm asking you, Dong, just there's no right or wrong answer. How do you know that you exist?
Actually, I know that I'm still existing because I can still breathe, I move, I also eat.
What if it's all imagined? That was essentially what Socrates was saying. Maybe I'm just imagining. But just for you've given a good answer. This was Socrates' conclusion. Okay? He says, I think, therefore I am. Mark, do you have something to say? Mark, do you have something to say? No? Okay. But that was Socrates' response. He said, I think, therefore I am. Samuel says it's an attitude that acts as a guiding principle. Yes, Sally, Emmanuel, we're coming also to that definition because there are two of them. So first of all, on the philosophy, when it is seen as an academic discipline, because there are people who study philosophy, yeah? Most religious leaders, those who, for example, I know priests and reverends, they take philosophy as a study, yeah? It's extremely important when you're trying to understand God and man to have a philosophical point of view, to understand who we are as human beings. The human being is our being human is a fundamental basic. If we are to study what it means to be human, yeah, what it means to be human, it explains so many things, yeah. If you ever listen to a theologian speaking, you fully understand why we are who we are. I'll give you an example. One time I was listening to a philosopher talking about who we are as human beings, our different body parts. He gave the simple example of we have our digestive system. It starts from the mouth, okay? And it has, we have all the senses in the mouth. From the mouth, it goes down to your throat, to your stomach, and so on and so forth, until whatever comes out. Then he said, when we start eating, why do we eat? What's the reason, the primary reason for us to eat? This will lead us to our second definition. If I just ask Sharon, let me ask Sharon. Sharon, why do we eat?
Madam, we eat to grow.
We eat to? Sorry?
healthy.
Yes, that's the primary
To
reason.
be healthy.
Yes, Sharon, that is the primary reason actually, to be healthy. We eat to live. That's the primary reason. But however, there are people who eat for the sake of pleasure, not so. Laura, not so. Yeah, there are people who eat for pleasure, just for the primary purpose of pleasure. What happens when a person eats primarily for pleasure only? What happens? Juliet Kusima, can you tell us what happens when an individual decides I'm only going to eat for the sake of pleasure? Juliet, Bridget, Kusima. What happens when somebody decides I'm only going to eat for the sake of pleasure, not for the sake of my health?
I think they'll eat more than they should.
Exactly. This is where now you have what we call an eating disorder. Yeah. There's a show my niece and I like to watch on DSTV on TLC called My 600 LB Life, where you find people who are over 600 pounds. They're obese. Sometimes they can't even walk. They are bound to their bedrooms, even going through simple things like going to the toilet, bathing themselves. They can't do it. And there's a doctor who works with them, and you really see his struggles with them when he starts them on the program of losing weight. When somebody comes with their put on weight, and he's trying to tell them, look, you're overeating. The person says, I don't know how I put on weight. And he gets so angry, he said, you know you put on weight because you're eating too much. Yeah. So that becomes an eating disorder. So this philosopher went on further. He was actually talking to the philosopher I was listening to. He was talking to men and women in the Catholic Church who suffer from same-sex attraction. So he went on further. By same-sex attraction, I mean those who identify themselves as being gay or homosexuals and things like that. So when he was talking, he went on further. He said, now seeing that, if we know that is a disorder, you imagine somebody who engages in the sexual act simply for the purpose of pleasure. What happens? That's when you find somebody is addicted to pornography, somebody is going to prostitutes, someone is being unfaithful in their marriage, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that is when somebody views the sexual act as something for pleasure alone, forgetting that it has its primary purpose. Yeah, the primary purpose of the sexual act, just like eating has a primary purpose of being healthy, the primary purpose of the sexual act is to produce life. Yeah. And when he said that, when he started the philosophical argument, Faith, now I don't know if you can see. Yeah. You see that philosopher started by asking on the subject of eating. If you know the primary purpose is to be healthy, and you decide that, no, me, I'm not going to eat for the sake of health, I'm going to eat for the sake of pleasure, then you have a disorder. So therefore, he said, it is the same thing with the sexual act. If you decide to use it primarily for pleasure, then you have a disorder. Faith, I don't know if you've understood how philosophy has come to help us understand our fundamental nature as human beings.
Yes, madam.
Yeah, you see, that was philosophy. Yeah, philosophy was trying to study. Now, this philosopher came in to teach a group of, and me who was listening, because I found the recording, it came in to teach me something. Then we come to the second definition, which we found on internet, a theory or attitude that acts as a guiding principle for behavior. So now by that philosopher teaching us, those who are listening, yeah, For me, I found it as a recording. For me, that for me was helpful for me, because for me as Sheba, I live a single celibate life. I am called to the single life. So when I see that, when I hear that teaching, it also comes to support me. Although that teaching was for people who suffer from same-sex attraction, for me now it was helping me because I live a single life. I am called to the single life. Those who are Catholic, you know that we are called to different lives. There are those who are called to marriage life. There are those called to religious life. There are those called to be priests. Then there are those who are called to the single life. So for me, it was something that was teaching me about how I should live my life, and why. Yeah? Why I need to be celibate, why I need to strive to live a life of purity, because I am aware the sexual act is not open to me because I am single. Yeah. So that philosophy now guides me. That principle, that attitude guides me. Now, in the same note, when we now bring this philosophical thinking in research, you also have, you as a researcher, you will have an attitude, the way you want to approach your research. There are some people who want to approach it in a positivist attitude, which is good. By the way, there is no right or wrong philosophy in research. If you feel it's numbers that will give you the response, then go for the numbers, as long as you can arguably defend using the positivist approach. If you feel that bringing a holistic picture into the situation that we truly need to understand, and you can defend it, then go ahead and say, I am going to take my research the positivist way, or in other words, quantitative way. And then another person says, no, my research, I really truly need to understand. For example, for me, I used a qualitative approach. Why? Because this was a new area. We needed to have a holistic picture. I was looking at ICT, but in terms of development. And anyone, if you have discussions with students in development studies, they will tell you how you need to see an entire picture. You've heard that our development studies students even go to visit witch doctors. They're taken to visit witch doctors. Why? Because in a community, people have different beliefs. And you're not, as a development worker, you're not there to turn people into Christians or Muslims. You're there to help them come out of poverty. So you have to understand their beliefs. You have to see somebody in his or her entirety. So for me, because I was dealing with development, I couldn't come in terms of quantitative approach, in terms of numbers. I needed to understand the situation of the people where I was going to implement the mHealth application. So that required the qualitative approach, or the interpretivism approach. Yeah. So the realism approach, if we are to look at the realism approach, it tries to combine the two. This is where we say we want to have both the qualitative approach and the positivist approach. And there you'll find people saying we're using mixed methods. Yeah. Somebody has a chat here. Faith is asking, Madam, am I a nun? No, Faith, I'm not a nun. I am a lay person, but I live a single life. So that means I do not have children, and I do not seek for a husband. I live specifically as a single person, with no intention of seeking any relationship, any romantic relationship whatsoever. So that is my single status. That is my vocation. Yeah. And I would encourage all of you to always seek your vocation, where you're called to. It really leads to a great deal of happiness. So research approaches. Do we have any question before we go further? Do we have any question? Any question? No? Okay, let's move on. So we then come to the research approaches, and these are also still related to the two philosophical approaches. So the approaches, you may decide to choose either deductive or inductive. So again, when we're looking at this approach, we are following a purely quantitative approach. So we begin by first looking at an existing theory. From that theory, we develop a hypothesis. Yeah, we saw hypothesis in the article I uploaded for you. That was a purely, then we can now tell that research was a positivist approach and they were using deductive and a deductive approach. Yeah. So it comes, let me give you an example. In the field of ICT, yeah, we have a number of theories which have been developed which explain adoption. Yeah, adoption of ICT. And these are a number of them. Yeah, one of them is the term theory. Can someone just quickly Google term? I'm going to ask Colin. Can just Google the term theory or technology adoption model.
Okay.
Yeah.
A system of ideas intended to explain something, and they continue to say, especially the one based on general principles, independent of the things to be explained, or we have a set of principles on which the practice of an activity is based.
Sorry, repeat that again, sorry.
A set of principles on which the practice of an activity is based.
Okay.
And we also have an idea used to account for a situation or justify a course of action.
Okay, thank you. Now, the people who developed term, and it was developed over time, and there are other methods, other adoption theories. I'm just trying to download them. There are quite a number of them. There's diffusion approach, term. There are so many others. People went ahead and developed theories on how and why people choose to adopt ICT. Now, what do we mean by adoption? ICT people or IT people will develop a system, an application, whatever it is. They'll place it in a context, and maybe they go put it in a context, and people either use it or they don't. People may choose to adopt it. People may choose to adopt it. So the different people have developed theories on why and how people adopt systems. One of them being term. So term sets out certain principles. Some of those principles that I just know offhand are that women will adopt a system if they find it easy to use. Men will adopt a system if they find it useful. Okay? Those two principles. Now, someone may say, I'm going to implement a system, then I'm going to examine on its ability to be adopted. So I will place it into a context. I'll give it to people. Maybe I'll do a lab experiment. I call different users in that organization. I ask them to use the system. Then I give them a set of questions. There are even actually sets of questions you can ask. You ask, when I use this system, I feel good. It was easy to move from point A to point B. Yeah. Someone is chatting here, Godwill. So I don't know. Let's continue. So anyway, you may set up a number of questions asking the different users on how they felt as they used the system. And at the end of the response, you can collect that data, analyze it statistically, and then you may find out most likely this system will be accepted, most likely to be rejected. Yeah. because people felt maybe it was not user-friendly, maybe it was, things like that. So that is having a deductive approach. Yeah. So you started from a theory using term. From that term theory, you develop hypothesis looking at usefulness and looking at usability. Those two aspects. Yeah. So with deductive approach, we normally use deductive approach in a research area where a lot of knowledge has been built, especially where theory has already been developed. For example, in the field of adoption, a lot of research has been done there, and there are many theories that can predict. Now, on the other hand, on the inductive approach, theory building, this is where we have little knowledge about something, little knowledge about a certain area. Yeah, so I gave you the example of my research where I researched and found there was little understanding in as far as ICT4D was concerned. So I decided to use the inductive approach, where I was first collecting data to develop a theory. So actually I developed a model, which was the starting point. It's not complete, but it's the starting point. But it was a model just to try and understand what is the developing context. What technologies are available today in a developing context? What are the skills levels of the users? And so on and so forth. Okay? Any questions so far? Here, Amza is giving us the technology adoption model refers to theories and frameworks that explain why people accept and utilize modern technology. Thank you. Thank you for that. Any questions so far on the deductive and inductive approaches, those initial explanations that I've given? No? Okay, let's move on. Oops, sorry. So we come to the stages of deductive approach. Essentially, I've gone through this. You start with a theory. Like I gave you the example of theory, you create a hypothesis. You saw an example of a hypothesis. It's a statement which is proposing an answer. And when you carry out your field research, you either say that the answer is true or false. That is the deductive approach. You express a hypothesis in terms of an operational term. Yeah. For example, in the case of you examining your system or application that you've placed, you would say, the level you talk about usefulness, that the usefulness, the higher the usefulness, the higher the possibility of being adopted. The more user-friendly it is, the higher the possibility of it being adopted. So you create those kinds of hypotheses, which at the end of the day you will answer based on the hypothesis. Yeah. Then you test your hypothesis. That means you actually go to the field, you implement, and then you experiment. You carry out an experiment, or you carry out another empirical research. If it's not an experiment, you'd put the system in the context, you allow people to use it for a period, and then you come back and ask them their opinions. Then you examine the outcomes of the inquiry. That means your inquiry may lead to other things. You may say, this is true, or you confirm that this is actually not true. Yeah, you might find in a situation where you're asking whether something was deemed to be useful, and everybody answers, yes, 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 it was useful, but still it wasn't adopted. You might find it was useful, but it's not accessible. Yeah, it will find it is user-friendly, but it's not accessible. Okay, so let me give you an example. Most people say Zoom is very good to use. It's light, much lighter than most video conferencing softwares like like Google Meet, and we have this one of Microsoft. I forget the name. We have the original that was there before Zoom. There's quite a number of them, but most people say Zoom is quite light to use. So if somebody said, let me ask all UMU students, and everyone says, yes, it's light, then somebody else says, but are you using it? The person says, no. I say, why? Because I don't have a device. So there may be something else that can affect adoption other than usefulness and usability. Yeah. So you may either confirm the theory, or you may modify it, or you may, that means you're also modifying the theory itself, yeah, in light of the findings. So here I have an example, but I've already given you quite a number of them. So I will not use it, but because I've given you quite a number of them. Let's come to inductive research, yeah. So inductive research, as we said, we come to examine a problem which has not yet been understood. For example, we said in the example I gave you for deductive, a lot of research has been done about adoption, and there are several theories and frameworks which measure adoption. So the question of saying, let me come up with a new theory on adoption doesn't really make sense, because there's been quite a bit of research. In inductive research, here you're going to a specific problem which is has not really been understood. So like I gave you the example of female genital mutilation. Right now, a lot of research has been done, but back then people didn't understand why you criminalize something, but people are still doing it. Yeah, especially something that causes a lot of pain. So you wonder, what is the driving force? So that is where inductive research comes in. You're trying to make sense of something that is not yet understood. So you go out there, you spend time with the people. After you've collected data, you begin formulating the theory. Yeah. So here are just some examples of the major differences between the two approaches. I will not go through them one by one. I'll ask you to read through it, and then we can have a discussion on that subject. So which approach would you use? Number one, it depends on the wealth of literature. If there's a lot of literature, there may not be need for you to use inductive. If it may be deductive approach that you need to use. Then it also, so something that has been developed before, has been studied in detail, you don't really need to use the inductive approach. Yeah. Time. The deductive approach is much quicker. Okay. It's much quicker than most approaches. I do some research on the side for an organization called Palliative Care Association of Uganda. So Palliative Care Association of Uganda, I don't know if any of you has heard about what palliative care is. Has anyone heard about palliative care? Okay, no response. I'm going to assume maybe you haven't heard about it. So basically, palliative care, we have different kinds of care in healthcare. We have curative care. That means you are sick. Let's say you have malaria. You go to a hospital, they give you anti-malarial drugs. You have an infection, you're given antibiotics, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So that is primarily curative care. Then we have preventive. So preventive is where maybe you have people talking to you about using mosquito nets so that you don't get a malaria infection. They will tell you use things like for HIV prevention, they'll say use condoms, practice safe sex, that is preventive care. For issues like blood pressure and diabetes, they'll tell you eat healthy food, avoid high cholesterol foods, avoid too much sugar, eat fruits and things like that. That is preventive care. Then we have what we call palliative care. So palliative care is usually end of life care. So you find people who are suffering, especially from things like cancer. Those are people who are in extremely a lot of pain. And one of the things that as you take treatment for cancer, not that cancer can't be treated, as you're taking treatment or other times when treatment also fails, there's what we call palliative care. And the intention of palliative care is simply to allow somebody to live their last lives, their last time in painless. So that's what Palliative Care Association of Uganda does. They focus on training palliative care nurses for health facilities. So the purpose of the purpose of that nurse in any health facility is to ensure that somebody has morphine and adequate morphine so that the person does not endure the pain of cancer. Anyone who has seen a patient of cancer knows how extremely painful it is. So normally that treatment is for people with cancer and people with HIV. Not all of them, but some people really need that treatment. Other cases are also people who suffer from sickle cells. They also suffer from really excruciating pain, and the everyday painkillers do not help. So that's the work I do on the side for research. And I think it was 2021, when we're still in the lockdown, we needed to collect data from the different healthcare facilities that have been given all over Uganda, that have been given, that have palliative care nurses. And we need to find out the issue of morphine access. How many of the facilities actually have access? Who supplies them? Do they have the record keeping equipment? Do they have, is there a time they receive outdated morphine, things like that? Basically, it was to measure morphine access for each of these health facilities. And to show you how the deductive approach is really quick, we designed a questionnaire. I put this questionnaire in Google Forms, and then we sent it to all the healthcare, the palliative care nurses in Uganda. And these people filled out this form. I received it, I downloaded it in Excel, and I began analysis. That is how quick it is. Of course, there were situations where people were not responding, and people in palliative, in Picao had to give them calls, please answer the questionnaire, please answer the questionnaire, things like that. But once you receive that data, it's now just a matter of either using Excel or SPSS, and you analyze the data and you find out, oh, this number of facilities have an adequate morphine, this number of facilities don't have a reporting system, this number of facilities don't have a supplier, this number of facilities don't have a palliative care nurse, things like that. So that was how quickly we could respond. We could receive the data, analyze it, and make a report. That was how quickly we could do it. Now, when it comes to the inductive approach, specifically qualitative approach, I told you I spent time with a community in India. I spent 2 years. So 2 years I would go to India for a workshop. I sit with them. Sometimes I'd get so bored, I start dozing during the workshop, but it had to take 2 years. Now, as opposed this research, which we did, I think it was in a period of 2 months. And one of the primary reasons was to simply call them, because some healthcare workers would see the email and they don't bother to fill out the form. But that is what the deductive approach does. So your time matters. Now you might say, oh, let me go for deductive approach to save time for my research. No, you can also do mixed methods. Yeah. So mixed methods means I can give out questionnaires. I can also do interviews. I combine the two. So you can also do this. It also depends on the risk. Yeah. On the risk of going deductive or inductive. Now, somebody might say, filling out these forms, if I send out a Google form, it will be much easier. There's less risk. No, that's not necessarily the truth. When I was doing my research, I did my research. My research was here in Uganda, but my supervisor was in the Netherlands. So I used to share an office with a young lady who was doing her PhD. And at a certain point, I remember she got so frustrated. She sent out a questionnaire via email to organizations. She was Dutch, organizations in the Netherlands, and nobody responded. So and with deductive approach, the number of respondents matters, as opposed to inductive. So for example, inductive approach, when I'm doing qualitative research, it's not how many people I talk to, it's how deep I go. Yeah, it's not how many people I talk to or how many people respond to me, but how deep do I go? So for example, for me, with my research, I just dealt with a group of village, what we call VHTs. These are ordinary community members who give healthcare support in the village. So they were just a small group of people whom I spent 2 years with, but I remember I recorded them in their workshops. I would talk to them individually. I would participate with them as they carried out their research. I did interviews with a few of them. Then at the end, I gave a questionnaire to this small group. They were a very small group, 50 people. And at minimum, you should have 100 people, minimum. And depending on the sample size, it could even be more than 100, maybe it should be 1,000. So for me, because I spent time with them, then I also gave them a mobile literacy exam. That also gave me a wealth of data. So all that data, I used it to bring an entire picture to explain. Now, for deductive, like I said, it's numbers. Yeah, it's the numbers that matter. So if you can't get the numbers, then it's better maybe you either use realism or you go purely qualitative if you can't get access to all those respondents. Yeah, so remember, with qualitative data, it's how deep you go. With deductive, it's how many. Any questions so far? When you're all silent, I get worried. That maybe I'm just talking to myself. But let's continue. Why is it important we study these approaches? Because the approach dictates what research strategy or method we are going to use. Yeah, when we look at research strategies in our next lecture, it will determine what approach you are going to, what strategy you're going to use. Am I going to use case study approach? Am I going to use ethnography? Because the different methods are attached to different approaches, okay? So it is important that we have a clear understanding for what approach, what philosophy we're going to use. Any questions so far? Any question?
So far, no, madam.
Okay, I really hope it's clear. So let us meet next week on ICT, on research strategies, and then I'll give you your first assignment. Okay. So there's a comment here. Stephen says no. Okay. So let us end here. Then we shall start next week on research strategies. Okay.
Okay, thank you, madam.
You're most welcome. Thank you too for your attendance and participation.
Thank you.